Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Coffee with Q. I'm Rene Perras, your host and legal news reporter. Coffee with Q is dedicated to helping consumers find justice. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Joe Osborne, a seasoned and accomplished medical malpractice trial lawyer with extensive experience in advocating for patients' rights. Today's show will be focused on potential complications arising from birth-related brain injuries that women and their families are facing in Florida medical facilities. Joe Osborne, our guest, has specialized in this area for nearly 30 years. Welcome, Joe, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about birth-related brain injuries. What is your approach when representing Floridians in these complex cases?
Well, that's a great question, especially in Florida. When a family comes to me with a potential birth injury case, one of the first things we have to look at is something called NICA. NICA stands for the Neurological Injury Compensation Act in the state of Florida, which was set up by the legislature back in the 80s and 90s in a way to limit and inhibit families from bringing claims when their children are hurt during the birthing process. NICA is very complicated, it's convoluted, and if NICA takes jurisdiction over the case, it can literally prevent you from bringing a claim. And one of the things that we do and that we've done in the past in terms of helping families get around NICA is we attack it, and we take the position that it does not apply in the case, and we have several defenses or attacks to the program that we can make for the family that at times work. So for instance, the providers who are involved in the delivery typically have to be participants in NICA, and we may be able to show that they were not fully active participants in the program that the state is holding, and therefore it doesn't apply. That sufficient notice was not given by the providers, even if they are participants, to the families such that the notice failed and that NICA should apply. We can attack the program based upon what happened to the child in terms of the outcome, and using experts attack the requirement that the injury occur during the labor and delivery and or resuscitation process. And we have medical arguments we can make around that to try and destroy the jurisdiction of NICA. What happens is if NICA accepts the program, if NICA accepts the case and says you can't file a case because this is a NICA claim, the parents are limited to $100,000 recovery per parent. And the benefits that are paid to the child are basically a secondary payer option. They paid for health care that anybody else doesn't cover. So if Medicaid or a private insurance company is already paying for it, the state gets to keep the money in their coffers. It's really a program that has real no benefit for families, and it's really designed to kind of limit lawsuits. But as a Florida potential birth injury case, one of the first things we have to look at is NICA, and you really need an experienced lawyer to make sure that the navigation of it is done correctly from the beginning, because we have handled it from all aspects, from full NICA hearings to trials to beating it to losing in it, but it's something that has to be done in these kinds of cases.
Sounds very unfair for Florida families.
Yes, it certainly is.
What challenges do families other than NICA typically face when pursuing a brain injury lawsuit?
Obviously, just kind of flowing from our last answer, NICA is certainly number one, but number two, I think it really is a causation issue. There are so many things, obviously, that can go wrong at times during either the course of a pregnancy or during the course of the birthing process. The families are just so many times faced with questions about what happened. How did this occur? And a lot of times between the doctors and nurses that are caring for the mom and the child, there just are so many more questions than answers. It's such a complicated and complex thing. Meaning you would think the birth of a human being going back to the beginning of time, is something that maybe over time would become more understandable. But in a hospital setting, especially for the average person, between the machines you're hooked up to, the fetal monitor strips, the various doctors that see you, the various nurses that are involved. When something bad happens, it's really hard to kind of get straight answers or figure out what happened. And I think that's really the biggest challenge, to know, hey, did something go wrong? Was this just a bad outcome? Was this just bad luck? Did somebody do something or fail to do something that would have prevented this? And I think me and my team and the experts that I've worked with in these cases, a lot of times we really get to the bottom of it and can give people answers. And the answers are, sometimes we may provide answers and say there's no case and this is what happened. And sometimes we can say, look, there's a real problem here and it forms the basis of a lawsuit, and we can help you out. But I think one of the great things we do in terms of this is at least get people answers. And a lot of times answers lead to real recoveries.
Well, it sounds like if there is an issue or some kind of bad outcome, that a family should find out, consult an attorney, and find out, was it just a bad outcome or was there actually some kind of error that occurred?
That's right.
I think that makes sense. Can you explain how brain injuries can affect a child's long-term development?
Sure. Well, there's both short-term and long-term development depending upon the extent of the hypoxia. Hypoxia means lack of oxygen to the brain or insufficient oxygen to the brain. And those require, ultimately can lead to very, very devastating consequences for a young child. And they can be across the board. They can be physical. It can be mental. It can be cognitive. It could lead from ultimately some speech issues, and brain injuries. While children are kind of resilient and they do have an opportunity to recover from some of these insults, depending upon its severity, ultimately the outcomes can be devastating. It's not. We've seen in cases children require 24/7 care. They will never go to normal schools. They will never have normal lives. They probably have short life expectancies based upon the injuries that are suffered. And then other injuries we have seen that are more subtle, that not till, maybe 3, 4, 5 years old, we start to see, significant behavior and emotional problems and control. We start to see, hey, how come my child's 3 or 4 and they're not walking yet? How come my child is 5 years old and can't say ABC and can barely speak? And so sometimes they're more subtle than that, in terms of comparing them to people or kids who are catastrophically injured at the time, and it's readily available based upon the medical testing once the child is born. But these are all things that need to be watched and monitored and certainly evaluated by parents, so that we can potentially ultimately connect it back to something that may have occurred during the birthing process.
And with the statutes of limitations, you have to identify that within 7 years?
7 years, yes.
Has the hospital or medical protocol improved for women when delivering babies?
That's a really, really difficult question, I think, to look at in general. I think you're going to have various, certain hospitals that probably have improved. We talk about decision to incision from recognizing problems during the course of labor and delivery and converting to cesarean sections. I think OBGYNs are more readily willing to say, let's just do a cesarean section to begin with, meaning that, certain women may want to have, I'd like to try to, deliver my child naturally. And I think up front, given maybe certain situations or clinical scenarios that exist in the pre-delivery phase or pre-labor phase, C-sections are being offered more readily available as a first line of treatment. And I think that, look, C-sections come with risk. It's surgery. But at the end of the day, your child, ultimately, the risk of a child developing hypoxia or a brain injury during a C-section is basically zero. And ultimately, it's probably the safest way for the child. Millions and millions of children get delivered vaginally without any issues. It's not a mistake or an error to recommend or allow that to happen for a woman to deliver her baby. But if it's going to be a vaginal delivery, you have to have a super heightened sense of awareness that if there's a problem, converting to a cesarean section and doing that quickly in a hospital is something that needs to be done. The hospital has all the facilities. C-section rooms are ready. Everything is set up to happen quickly. If a problem occurs, it just needs to be recognized and occur if something does go wrong.
There are many visits that families have with their doctors before delivering their babies. I'm not sure if this happens or not, but do they have discussions of complications and what the doctor is planning to do if they experience certain things?
Absolutely. Every OBGYN makes a mom sign the consent for a cesarean section before the delivery is planned, or before the expected due date. And those issues are discussed. So it's something that going into the process, typically all scenarios are discussed and planned for. It's just reacting accordingly. Sometimes it becomes about reacting to the information and what's happening on a moment's notice, as opposed to, not necessarily doing the right thing in a timely fashion. Again, this all comes down to minutes. Minutes can matter. Again, it's like your little one drowning in the pool. Minutes matter. Once you cut off oxygen to the brain, or there's insufficient oxygen to the brain, within 2 or 3 minutes, the wrong decision or being distracted can prove, devastating. So it's just making sure those kinds of things don't happen.
That makes so much sense. Maybe there's one particular case of a family in Florida that you helped that had these types of issues occurring.
Yeah, we actually had a recent case where we represented this poor mom. It was her first child, it's a daughter. And during the course of the birthing process, a nurse inserted a medical instrument into the vagina to check on something. And unfortunately, when she inserted it, she did it incorrectly, which caused the placenta to disrupt and cause placental bleeding, which came out the vaginal canal. And obviously, when that occurs, that means enough blood and oxygen is not getting to the baby. So it was a medical emergency. Unfortunately, that nurse, instead of calling a code right away and calling for help, tried to cover it up because she didn't want to get in trouble, and clearly had caused this issue. And there was a significant delay in recognizing what happened and then ultimately getting the child out. Well, because of all that, the child ended up catastrophically brain injured, and we ended up representing that family in that case.
You must meet a lot of families with these type of sad situations. I commend you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
To find out more about Joe Osborne, Florida trial lawyer with Osborne and Francis, you can visit www.realtoughLawyers.com, or you can call Joe directly at 561-301-3292. Thank you, Joe, for coming on the show, and your experience with us today is always amazing. It was certainly helpful for me, and I'm sure for our audience as well.
Thank you.